have such sights to show you. We're Poppin the Scary Horror Podcast here. I'm your host, Coale, and with me, as always, I have my good friend and co-host, Aaron. Hey.
Hello!
Hi.
Hey.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing A-okay.
Great.
A-okay, dude. You ready for the movie today?
Oh, I'm down for a movie. I'm in a movie mood.
All right, well, the mood V.
Mood V.
Yes, what a mood V it is, because we're going to be looking at Night of the Living Dead from George A. Romero, which I'm sure you probably have heard of that movie.
Zombies.
Yeah, and I was very surprised that you hadn't seen it, because I know with some of the more classic horror films or most renowned, you usually have seen a few of them. But
yeah, like going into like an Alien or like one of those kinds of movies. I've seen them before, but not this one. No.
Yeah.
Never did check this one off my list. So.
Yeah. Do you have any context about like stuff you heard about it growing up, or especially with film classes or anything like that?
Gosh, honestly, no, not really. I didn't take too many film classes. Took one or two, and I just I just know this is like the classic, the zombie movie. You know what I mean? But that's all I know.
Yeah. Night of the Living Dead for me has kind of an interesting perspective for me, because I had heard a lot about it, and again, we kind of mentioned this on the Dawn of the Dead remake episode we did, but we kind of grew up in the like renaissance of really craving that zombie carnage, Survivor's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse, etc., Left 4 Dead, all those big zombie, popularity explosion.
Oh yeah,
boom.
There's just like 5 zombie-related games or movies or TV shows every week,
Oh, good lord, yeah. It has died down a little bit there, but I'd still say it's relatively present. But yeah, this film is definitely heralded as, just one of the greats there, especially with George A. Romero. They either claim this or the original Dawn of the Dead is his best work that he accomplished. And it's very interesting for me because I saw it once over 10 years ago. And, I went into it just being like, man, I've heard a lot of good things about it. I'm really going to dive in. And I guess I'll get this out of the way because it's been so long that I don't know if it's just because of the presence I had during that moment. But I remember leaving the film being like, okay. Yeah, that was pretty much it, and ever since then I haven't rewatched it, but hearing a lot of like podcasters talk about it, I agree that culturally it's super significant to the horror genre there, but when it comes to actual entertaining movie, I would hear other people like talk highly of it there, and I'm like, it was okay or whatever, but enough time has passed where it makes me curious about wanting to revisit it and see if my perspective has changed at all whatsoever, because there wasn't anything like defining, I remember, per se, about what I disliked about it there. So it's going to be an interesting discovery for me as well to see if I still hold those same sentiments that I did like a decade ago, or perhaps like as I've gotten older, experienced more film, kind of have better connotation for stuff, it's actually going to be heightened. So I'm very curious about this episode, and yeah, I mean, that was my perspective. That was a little bit longer-winded than other perspectives. I don't know. I just heard about it.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that's the niche of this podcast. We bring different perspectives to the table.
Oh yeah.
One of us has seen the movie, the other one is not. That's almost always the perspective of this podcast.
Yep. For the past 50 episodes, because this is episode number 50 here, baby.
Woo!
And what film to watch on the 50th episode, so we'll be right back whenever Aaron and I watch Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah. Get those dead alive.
I feel dead.
I'm dead inside too.
Any zombies out there? Don't say that. What? That. What? That. The Z word. Don't say it. Why not? Because it's ridiculous. All right.
And we are back from watching Night of the Living Dead. And Aaron, how's about that trip back to 1968?
1968. What a treat. Yeah. No, I honestly didn't know it was going to be a black and white movie. I was like, oh, cool. Because, 68, I feel like is right around that time where it's like sometimes they're making black and white movies, sometimes they're making full color movies.
Yeah, from what I know about, because obviously it's a big historical film in the horror genre, they had like $150,000 budget, and they're like, yeah, let's just film it black and white, make everything way easier.
It seemed kind of low budget. It kind of had like, I don't know, I could tell most of the way through the movie, I was like, this has like some indie budget vibes, but also old movie vibes. So it was an interesting mix, because I think this is the first time we've seen like a old movie that was also like a really low budget movie. I don't know.
Yes, I believe so, because really the only ones that could be even comparable is maybe Nosferatu, maybe, but even then, I'm sure they had probably a lot more money. Actually, I'm not sure. See, now I'm curious.
And then the conversion rate between like the 20s and
Yes, anyways, but yes, you're definitely right that we haven't seen too many low budget horrors where basically it didn't seem like they had a lot of money there.
At least not ones that were like this old. Because it was interesting to see the intersection of those two things. Because, when you're watching low-budget movies, you can forgive some stuff because you're like, all right, that was a cheesy effect because they didn't have much of a budget. And you can kind of do the same thing for old movies because it's like, okay, well, they didn't have the technology at the time. So they didn't have the tech or the money.
Yes.
So there were some like, obvious just, like, goofs and gaffes, Like, that was a a rough cut there, or that was a whatever. And it wasn't stylistic, it was just they made a mistake, and that's, like, probably couldn't afford to reshoot it.
Yeah, for sure, especially because if you watch it, they replay a lot of the scenes. It reminds me of that one scene from Monty Python's Holy Grail with Lancelot running forward, and you could clearly tell they just reused the shot. But yeah, definitely a lot of scenes like that. Which, I mean, I wouldn't blame them for some of the shots they had to do there. Just kind of makes sense. Like, yeah, just repeat.
Right, and obviously 1968 is all practical effects, but it's low budget, so there's some funny parts. Like, there's one part where it's just, like, an obviously, like, clay hand that they're cutting off. And, like, it just little clay bits are falling off. And, it just leads to some funny effects, but...
No, it's really funny.
Other effects were impressive, though. And people were, like, on fire, and, like, I was like, oh, wow, that's cool for a low-budget 60s movie. I think they actually set somebody on fire.
Yeah.
Time for you to die, Tim. We're just gonna set you on fire, run around a little bit.
Yeah.
But then other stuff was like, here's a fight scene, and it's just, like, fist flying 3 feet in front of somebody's face, and then they're like, oh,
Yeah, just with like the stock sound effect, the
but it had a lot of charm. Yeah.
Well, that's good. Yeah. I'll probably figure out how I feel about this film second time through after we discuss it, because I'm still digesting it.
Yeah, honestly.
So let's talk about the plot here. So the plot of Night of the Living Dead focuses on Barbara and her brother, who are taking a drive 3 hours from their home to put grave flowers on I believe it's their grandfather's grave or their father's grave.
Yeah, I think it's their dad's grave.
Yes.
Because their old mom wants them to go driving out there.
Yes, that is correct. And anyways, whenever they head out there, they realize something is amiss whenever they see a local walking around the cemetery, only to find out that it's not your average local, but instead it is one of the ghouls, as George A. Romero refers to it there, because zombie wasn't really a often used term there, and in fact I don't think they call them zombies at all in the film. They just say ghouls.
No mention of the word zombie.
But I mean, just for modern day context, a zombie's walking around.
Right.
And after they have a bit of a scuffle there, Barbara's able to run away and find herself at a farmhouse, and lo and behold, more survivors appear, and they're trying to figure out how to survive the zombie apocalypse.
Yeah.
I mean, overall plots, I mean, it's just zombie apocalypse plot. I feel like they all have kind of the same idea of just, we need to survive the zombie apocalypse, which ain't nothing wrong with that. I mean, obviously, it's worked for several other films there. It's a good, solid plot overall.
And it's kind of cool to see, like, this is the first film that did that. You know what I mean? Like, that's, as much as I don't know about this film, there's one thing I do know is that it's, like, the first modern zombie movie. And I saw a lot of, you know, because I don't think horror as a genre was really what it is today. Back then, the zombie genre did not exist at all, and it's like, it's interesting to watch that film and see some of the, like, oh, it's going along with the tropes of this genre, even though they weren't invented yet. So it was kind of neat.
Yeah, it was one of the first ones to definitely kind of get that survival aspect. I do know that there is one film that predates this even earlier called White Zombie, which was released in 1932 there. So that's technically that's the first zombie movie, but really The Night of the Living Dead is like easily even more like one of the first ones to help establish it even more. So it definitely deserves a title of being like one of the first zombie apocalypse films there for sure. And you know, it does a really standard fine job, I think, of just being an overall zombie film. Like, if you could only choose one film to represent zombies, I feel like this one's a fairly fine candidate to be a representative of that.
I feel like a lot of the plot and interest in this movie was probably carried by the fact that it was like a novel idea at the time, and it's going to be interesting as we review it now in the present time, where we've seen many zombie movies that have built upon this legacy, maybe improved some things, maybe made some more interesting aspects, where we like all get, you just say zombie film, everybody has like a template in their brain now, but that didn't exist. They didn't even use the word zombie in this film to describe it. So I feel like maybe a lot of the interest and intrigue is, you know, lost to history now that we have that context as a modern audience. But it's still, you know, it's a pretty cut and dry zombie movie.
Yeah, it'll definitely be kind of interesting just to kind of look at it, because again, the film does spend a lot of time giving exposition, because again, they're trying to clarify. You know, I feel like every zombie film has their own set of rules they follow. Not every zombie is the same there. So they spend a lot of time, especially given that it really wasn't a popular concept like it is nowadays, zombie apocalypse, where, you know, if you asked anybody back in 1968 about, like, you know, oh, you know, can you tell me about a zombie? They probably couldn't tell you. But nowadays, ask anybody off the street and they probably could give you like general hints there. Now granted, it might be from one mythos to another mythos, but more people know what a zombie is. So the film has to spend a lot of time explaining and giving hints, so it's very interesting.
And also, we're like talking about pretty casually zombie movies, zombie this, they see a zombie, but like they don't reveal the fact that these are dead people reanimated until like 2/3 of the way through the movie. Like, that's one of the like twists, like, oh, that's what these people are. And I'm sure even audiences that weren't familiar with zombie type films at the time probably could guess that, you know, the guy wandering around the graveyard in a dusty looking tuxedo is, or like a, you know, nice suit that one would be buried in. You could probably start to guess these are reanimated dead. But the characters in the film have no concept of it, and it's written in such a way that it seems like they assumed the audience would have no concept of this either.
Yeah, so I think that's definitely good on them for writing the story that way, you know, because I think it's a lot easier for them to have done it like that, as opposed to one of the common things, you know, I joke about is the fact that anytime a modern zombie movie comes out, it's always like, oh, what's going on? And it takes them a while to catch up.
And it's kind of silly when it's like, don't you guys know what zombies are? Like,
yes, for sure.
Set in the year 2000 or whatever. You guys know what zombies are.
Yes, that's exactly my line of thinking as well there. So it's definitely a lot more forgivable in this sense. Not to mention, they do show them pretty much as a big threat after their first introduction.
Right.
Like, it's never like continual misconception of that. So I think that's definitely well played. But we should talk about the survivors, I suppose, there.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the first survivor, Barbara. Barbara, who's played by Judith O'Dea, and I feel like she does a really good job, but then I feel like as the story continues on, they just stop developing her character entirely.
They do sort of drop her off a little bit, and I thought they were setting something up that they weren't, and it just turns out that they didn't care about her anymore.
Yeah, they were just like, oh yeah, we're done. You were just the vehicle just to get to the main story.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and he is traveling with her brother Johnny there, who, my God, Johnny is a one heck of a dude.
He's funny. Sad he wasn't in the film for much longer, but he serves the purpose of being the first guy to die to a zombie, to show you that zombies are bad. So, rip Johnny. But...
Yes, and one of those things where, you know, I mean, he's not like the most antagonistic character ever, but at the same point, I feel like they make him just antagonistic enough to where you don't feel quite as bad or whatever. Cause
yeah, he's like complaining because he has to drive all his way to drop this thing off for his dead dad. You know, I don't even remember what this guy looks like, and you know, he's complaining to his sister the whole time, and then he's making fun of her, and you know, he's being a little turd of a brother, but.
Yeah, he does have the great line, which I do use sometimes anytime I meet someone named Barbara. Granted, mind you, I don't do this all the time. I'll do like once and then I'll continue on with my day or whatever. But I do love his line, "They're coming to get you, Barbara." You know, whenever he's trying to scare her in the cemetery. And it does allow a great bit whenever he's like, "Look, he's coming your way." He's like, "Stop being mean to that dude. Like, what are you doing?"
Why are you... He can hear you, you know, like, why are you saying weird things about this random other guy in the cemetery?
But I guess he does, and again, sorry for very, very early spoilers for Night of the Living Dead, but again, I feel like at this point it's kind of bored. But whenever she is being attacked by the first zombie, we're just going to keep calling them zombies for the sake of... knowing it, but
I'm gonna call them ghouls just because that's a funny word. We're not gonna be able to say ghouls very often on this podcast.
I will also try to say ghouls, but knowing me, I'll probably switch back to zombie.
Yeah.
But whenever she's attacked, that he tries to jump in and help her. So I mean, I guess there's like that one bit of credibility, one little brownie point to share over there. But
redeems himself a little bit.
It definitely is a great opening scene, regardless, because again, you get like the cemetery, which is like classic setting for a film like this. And so whenever she's running away to the farmhouse there, that's whenever she runs into Ben, who's played by Dwayne Jones, who really I think is probably the strongest character.
Oh yeah.
They're just like written wise, and
as soon as he enters, he kind of takes over the role as the lead of the story.
Yes, that's exactly how I feel. And supposedly Dwayne actually rewrote a lot of his lines for his character because he wanted him to be a lot more grounded and believable than what George had written, as well as the man, I'm already blanking, John Russo wrote for his character. So you could definitely tell he's like, he has his character down, just trying to be realistic, trying to survive there. There is a couple of goofy moments there, but I think it's just kind of due to the fact that Barbara as a character pretty much is shell-shocked for the entirety of the film. Afterwards.
Yeah. After seeing what happened to her brother and escaping from the ghouls.
The ghouls.
She is pretty psychologically damaged.
Yeah. But I feel like overall he does a fine job of trying to be the leader, trying to initiate a plan and try to figure stuff out, as opposed to just, you know, cooping up and everything, which is what Harry Cooper, as we meet later, played by Carl Hardman, tries to do. He's pretty much the polar opposite, where he's like, no, we are safe here. Right. Let's just
hide in the cellar and you know, call it a day.
Yeah, which definitely I think adds an interesting dynamic. And you know, it's like starts the early belief of like, oh, during a zombie apocalypse, it's not the zombies you have to worry about, it's the people.
Right, and that's why it was interesting that this film kind of established that trope too, that the focus obviously was on the zombies, but like most of the conflict was like, all right, we're safe for now, and then there's disputes among the people that are safe about how we're supposed to go about things.
Yeah, because Harry definitely has a different ideology than what Ben does on how to survive, whereas Ben's wanting to actively make a plan to like move to another safer location there. Harry's just content with just staying boxed up there because he's like, we've been here for a while, they haven't been able to break in, this is the best plan.
Right, we gotta just wait for someone to come. Yeah.
Yes, and so then he also has his wife and kiddo downstairs, as well as Tom and Judy, played by Keith Wayne and Judith Ridley, who, again, I feel like they're fine characters. All of them, I feel like, Helen is kind of the strong, supportive, spouse to Harry, even though she can acknowledge he's being ridiculous a lot of the time as they're trying to protect their young girl who is not feeling very well during this whole ordeal. And Tom and Judy, I feel like, are just like the average young couple trying to stick together and do their best.
Yeah, I feel like everybody has their own, like, driving force that is distinct from everyone else's, which was really cool to see in this film. Harry has the driving force of, like, stay in, box up, be safe. And then he's butting heads with Ben, who's like, no, we gotta go, we gotta be active. And then, Helen is like, I just care about the kid, I just want to keep my kid safe. And also, there's like a weird divorce drama between her and Carrie a little bit. But they're like, whatever, we'll put that aside for now while we're trying to keep the kid. The young dude is like, I have to make the right decision to pick which one of these leaders I'm supposed to follow. And then Judy is like, I just got to keep my man safe. And then Barbara's just traumatized on the couch the whole time, trying to, and she's driven by the fact that she wants to save her brother whenever she becomes lucid enough to remember that he was passed out, quote unquote, in the graveyard last she saw him. But other than that, she's just trying to, get with it. But
yeah, I would say overall it's a good number of people to have there, because I think if they would have had more, then they would have had even less time to develop the characters, and they just feel like
been more chaotic, and
they just feel kind of like clear cardboard cutouts just meant for a kill setup and everything.
But I think it was paced pretty well in how they introduced the characters, and like how many was introduced, because you kind of get to focus on Barbara and then Ben and then Harry and then and then the rest of the group sort of trickles in, and they all have enough conflict between them and the zombies outside that they're making things interesting without it being too chaotic or too like, oh, I can't tell what's going on.
But I would argue overall those are probably the main characters. I mean, obviously you see loads of characters on the television whenever they're trying to stay up to date on news and everything, but I feel like there's not too much to talk about. I feel like they're just kind of exposition.
No. There's like those people, there's like the sheriff that they keep going to a few times, and like some reporters, and there's like, some zombies that you see more than once because they're constant conflicts.
Yes.
But other than that, I mean, those are the important recurring characters.
I will ask this about the ghouls. What did you think about the ghouls overall, comparing them to like other zombies?
I mean, one thing I always heard was that like the ghouls of yore, the ghouls in the Night of the Living Dead were slow and not that scary because they weren't like running or whatever, and that it wasn't until like the 90s and 2000s that they started making scary zombies where they run at you and they look different, and they're strong and whatever, that these were kind of weak, but the scary part was that there's a lot of them, and that they want your flesh. But I was actually surprised that they were like more or less as capable as an average dude, you know what I mean? Like, they were flipping over cars and chasing people down, and they were a scary force to some degree. But yeah, they were also kind of weak, where if there's just one out there, they're just like beating them up. Like, like there's a part where Ben just like beats up like 5 of them and just goes back inside and was like, well, I guess we gotta think of something else. It like didn't seem like they were in that much danger, but The danger definitely ramps up as time goes on, and it becomes much more convincingly spooky.
Yeah, and supposedly whenever they were writing the script for this, they did get influence from the book I Am Legend there, which, if you know, they have like a lot more stronger, faster running kind of zombies there, but obviously they didn't rip it off entirely there, because they are pretty slow there, but they do a lot more. They're not just standing there and then they just lunge, because they do remember a lot of stuff. Like, they are able to pick up stuff like rocks and sticks and start doing that.
That's what I was interested by. They are some of the most human zombies, I feel like. Not in the sense that they have like they can think ahead. You notice they can't like think ahead, but they can, like, they use tools, and they, you know, they don't like light, and there's like one part where they're like breaking out the headlights of a car and stuff, you know what I mean? And so they set up interesting little details like that about the lore of these ghouls, but yeah, they're not hatching plans and shooting the shit with each other, you know?
Yes, exactly. I'm pretty much of the same thing. I feel like it's just like, yep, it's good zombie there. I have no issue with them. I feel like they're good, slow variety, and they do show how they can clearly be a menace, because like I said, there are some moments where they are like running towards them. Granted, they're not, you know, like Olympian sprinting across the fields or anything like that.
like in Get Out, we're just
yes, doing that.
That's still one of my favorite.
Oh, dude,
horror movie moments.
It's such a good moment, man. Just
the old black guy just jogging. 2 a.m. just running straight at you.
Yeah, that would be horrifying if there was like a million of those in a zombie film. But yeah, I mean, I feel like they do add the tension, and they do show a lot of stuff, because like a lot of the quote-unquote survival guide bits, you know, because like Ben's immediately like, here, find anything that's wood and board up the windows and doors. We need to make sure we reinforce everything so that way they can't break in easily. And he's clearly like thinking of a plan. He's like able to break apart furniture. He's setting couches on fire just to stave them off and make them move. Like, he's constantly thinking of ideas and everything. So that's kind of interesting to see, as opposed to just what they could have done is just like, you know, use the gun to shoot.
Right, because there's definitely some people in this movie that are just like useless.
Yes.
That don't have that survival instinct. So it was interesting to have that variety of it. I have at least one guy, if not, you know, a couple people in there that were ready to take charge and do things that make sense, you know, unlike a lot of horror movies where you could have just had some people running for an hour and a half. But
yes, exactly. But yeah, I mean, I feel like rewatching this film has made me appreciate it more, I think, than the first time I watched it, because, you know, whenever I watched it like 10 years ago, it was during like the absolute peak of zombie horrors and stuff, and I think I have become so desensitized to it there that by the point I watched it, I wasn't really amazed, because I didn't really put it into context there, because I remember watching it and I'm like, it's okay. Not to mention, I believe this is correct, but with Night of the Living Dead being public domain, there's like been several cuts people have done and everything, that I'm not even sure what cut or version I watched of it. So because there are some scenes that I'm like, I remember this, then some scenes where I'm like, I don't remember any of this there. So it's so hard to know exactly what version I watched there. Fortunately, we watched the Criterion version of it, which was superb. I thought it was like great restoration overall. But yeah, it definitely sat a lot better with me, where I was able to take in moments. Granted, it definitely was a slower moving film at some points there, where you didn't really see a lot of zombie action. It's just mostly them kind of working through the house, but they're still working on stuff. It's not just them, you know, kicking around, not doing a single thing there. But yeah, it was definitely interesting. How did you feel about like the pacing and them just staying in the farmhouse for the majority of the time?
I felt like they did what they could with, you know, I feel like keeping them in the farmhouse was maybe a decision based on budget as well. Just keep it to a single shooting location for the vast majority of the movie. I feel like they did what they could to make it interesting. They definitely, even when you first see the farmhouse to when you last see the farmhouse, they do a lot to it. As far as boarding up windows and changing the scenery and dragging the TV around and stuff. And they keep the conflict inside pretty interesting with changing locations, which can be hard when you're limited to one house for the vast majority of the movie. I do feel like there was some lulls in the pacing when it comes to just how the dialogue was written and like waiting for one conflict to happen between other conflicts. It was like there's a little bit of maybe polishing that could have been done there. But I think overall I didn't find myself just like falling asleep or anything. There were some moments where I was like, my brain was like, this is when I would check my phone normally. Yes. You know what I mean? But it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was poorly paced, but it's not like a master class in pacing either. It's just like, it was decently paced.
Okay. Well, that's good. Whenever it came to the special effects they implemented in the film, I was genuinely surprised that even though I could tell, like, okay, yeah, I know how they did that effect there, that it still looked pretty good. Yeah, especially whenever it came to, like, a hand reaching through the window and, you know, they're trying to fight it off with a knife there. You see, like, a couple of fingers get lopped off there and, like, blood sprayed on it, you know. So I thought that was kind of, like, nifty there. I was actually impressed with the bullets anytime they got shot by the gun. I was like, wow, that's pretty done well there.
Because a bit of the movie had already gone by and we'd seen some effects, so I was worried about what they were going to do with the gun. But yeah, it was pretty realistic. It stood up to modern shooting standards.
Yeah. So I was very impressed that it looked good, and how violent it got and kind of gory in some stuff, because I know they find that dead body in the second story there, so I was surprised how much they showed of that.
I was surprised too, because it's definitely like, I feel like most of the movie seems like pretty standard for the times, clean, where they don't show or focus on too much gore or special effects and that, but then there were certain moments or certain pieces of focus where they just kind of were like, went all out, and I was like, god damn, like okay, like they weren't even showing toilets on the screen at this point in film history or whatever, and then now they're just showing this. But
yeah. So that was kind of like cool, kind of seeing early signs. Granted, it's very, very, very sparse there to where I feel like, you know, like the film could be watched by people who are even squeamish. Minus those two moments, it's like complete clean.
By modern standards, it's pretty dang clean for a horror movie. But definitely some moments that surprised me.
For sure. Aside from that, was there anything else you wanted to mention before getting into spoilers or anything like that?
Man, I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, because like obviously there are other elements. I do think cinematography is done pretty well. Yeah, I kind of like the rough guerrilla style shooting that you could tell like from some of the scenes they did there.
It definitely leaks in parts, and you like from beginning to end, it's consistent in the fact that sometimes there's just like an out of focus shot where they're running with someone or something, and I was like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, and then music is fairly standard. I felt like it wasn't distracting. But also at the same point, I wasn't like, you know, humming along with a tune there. Right. I'm just like, yep, fits well with the film.
Yeah, I don't think anything like editing wise was necessarily a marvel, with the exception of the ending credits, which I obviously can't like talk about specifically, but I felt like the way they handled the ending credits was really interesting for a movie of that time. But I mean, I guess I could talk stylistically what they did. They just kind of like kept the audio and just kept on showing like photograph stills of like what happened as they were rolling the on-screen credits. And I was like, that's pretty cool for 1968. Like the way they did that with the music and the people talking, like just like natural sound of the. I can't even mention who was talking because that would spoil things. Yes. But anyway, no, I thought that was really neat. But the rest of the film was like, okay, you know, there's definitely a few like editing mistakes, quote unquote, but that was probably because they didn't have any other way to do what they were trying to do, or because they couldn't reshoot something and needed to add in this scene or what, because it was a low budget and older tech. So, I mean, I forgive them for those sorts of things, but at the same time, it's like other movies at this time weren't making those mistakes. So,
Yeah. All right. Well, that makes me very curious about your rating. So, how's about we get to that right now?
all right. Well, once again, I'm gonna sort of maybe give some of this film. I'm gonna rate this film in the context of the age for the most part. I mean, we are a modern viewing audience, so I can't just be like, well, I pretended I was in the year 1968 when I watched this film. It definitely does lose a bit, I would assume, from being dated. So that's gonna count a little bit off for me, just because you can't ignore that. But at the same time, I'm trying to think of everything in context whenever I'm rating this film. That, you know, this is impressive for the mood and the how they handled a lot of the decisions with the characters, the plot, considering this subgenre did not exist at the time, how creative and stuff they were. I'm not going to dock points for things like that, just because we have all seen that before now, because nobody had seen that before at the time. So I guess I should say I'm not going to dock points for those sorts of things. That being said, I think this film's like a 6.5 out of 10.
Okay.
I recognize it's really important historically, but like watching jump cuts and bad dialogue and stuff hasn't really, it's like it's still not great. It's really interesting. I think I probably enjoyed it more than a 6.5 from like I like seeing these moments in history kind of thing. Be like, oh wow, they did this in 1960. Oh, that's cool. I didn't know they were doing these kinds of things. I didn't know they would show this in a scene in 1968. So from that kind of perspective, it was interesting. But yeah, it was like a 6.5. There are definitely some characters that I can talk about more whenever we can talk more about their decisions that I was like, this is stupid. And even for the time, that was stupid. And there was definitely some I don't know. Yeah, again, the pacing wasn't perfect. A lot of this movie wasn't perfect, but a lot of the movie was also still, entertaining even for a modern audience. But I do think I'm not saying it aged like milk, because it aged perfectly well. It's still an entertaining film, and it's still a well-made film. It's just a lot of the things that I think the film focused on at the time, because they were novel and interesting, are no longer novel and interesting. So it's like a 6.5 for me.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, I can certainly tell you I am comforted by your score. Okay. Because I know people love this film. Like, they rated like 9 or 10 because they just really gravitate towards it. They love it and everything else. And obviously people will always vary on what they rate high and what they rate low, because that's just people in general there. Like, some people consider Citizen Kane the greatest film of all time. Some people consider Fast and Furious the greatest film of all time. I know you're out there. Don't lie to me. But
your opinion is valid. It's also stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that being said, I can confidently say I think I enjoyed this. Well, I know I enjoyed this film more than I did the first time. Mm-hmm. Marginally.
Okay.
It definitely is not like leaps and bounds, because I remember not hating Night of the Living Dead, but again, with how much people clamored and everything at the time, I was like, okay.
Right.
And now rewatching it again, it's like, I could see it. I don't know if I feel the same way.
Right.
I think that's where I'm at personally there, because you're right. I feel bad about this, but there was a lot of moments where I was starting to zone out a bit whenever they were like just inside the house, kind of just figuring out what to do next and everything. Like, starts to like space out just a teensy bit there. Like, I was still had my attention on there, but there's moments that I was like, yeah, okay. So like, the check your phone moment, like I was getting close to those as well, which I feel super bad about, because there is definitely a lot to respect about this film. Again, I definitely do believe it should deserve the recognition that it gets. I don't know. It's one of those weird things that I'm like, I'm happy people rate it high. I just don't rate it high personally there. I still think it's definitely a film to be respected, especially one of the things being that like this is one of the rare earlier films I feel like that has a black lead kind of being the leader and everything.
I was
so
impressed by that too. That he was a lead, and he was not like there was no sort of tension. Like, why is a black man telling me what to do? He was just like doing it, and everyone was like, okay. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's super cool and awesome. So like culturally, even I feel like this film is very important. It's just one of those things that, you know, when viewing it as a film and everything, it just starts to be like, okay, and yeah, the decisions are pretty gosh darn dumb, which again I realize that zombie apocalypse in general, where it's like, oh, if you make a stupid mistake it could be your death basically.
Right.
I get that, but there's some things that I'm like, what's going on?
Why would you do it that way?
Yes, exactly. What were they thinking? You know. But that being said, for, you know, again, the things they pulled off, again, just like practical effects, you know, movie from the late 60s, especially the budget they were running off of, everything else, this gets an admirable 6 out of 10 for me. Like, it's still a solid film overall. Like, if someone said like, yeah, I'm watching Night of the Living Dead, it's just like, okay,
yeah,
you know, just kind of like, yeah, sure, sounds fine. So yeah, I mean, I still recommend it. Like, if people are curious on kind of like one of the first zombie films, kind of like how films have developed, especially if you're a big fan of zombie films and everything, you should still definitely see it.
Yeah,
it's definitely,
yeah.
yes, for sure. So it's definitely worth your time and a watch, and there's still a lot to be respected about there. I think, just like with Aaron, it's just one of those things that I can't just, you know, sugarcoat it just because of how important the film was. I mean, that's kind of like the thing with Citizen Kane. Yes, I acknowledge it changed the film standard for the entirety of decades to come, but I don't rate it like 11 out of 10.
Right.
Yeah, but I think overall that's my thoughts on my rating there. So let's get to that spoiler. How about it, boys and girls?
Spoiler time. Spoiler time. Should I start?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to talk about Barbara's development first, because she's like the first character and like one of the most important characters, but then just falls off completely. Boy, they were really probably accidentally kind of hinting that she was like gonna be a zombie or something, and then it never happened. Am I crazy for thinking that?
I don't know what happened with her character. I think they just wanted to have a survivor who was dealing with a mental breakdown, just to add more tension on what's going to happen.
Did you pick up on the zombie hints?
I never did, because I was too focused on the little girl becoming a zombie.
That one I was like, is definitely gonna happen. At first I was like, oh, is this gonna be a zombie thing? And then once they showed like the bandage on her arm, I was like, definitely a zombie thing. And then once the mother was like, she was bit by one of those ghouls or whatever, I was like, zombie time. I knew that one was gonna happen, and I kind of loved how they did that, even though it was incredibly cheesy how she killed Helen.
Oh my goodness.
She's just like, I'm gonna trip, and then just like on the ground for like 45 seconds while you slowly come towards me, and then stab me with a spade while I just accept that I'm being stabbed and not die immediately for an additional 1 minute, where she's like, and you get stabbed like 10 times before, like, you're not trying to move or grab the arm or anything.
Yeah, and just let the blood spray everywhere. That's like one of the most violent parts.
One of my biggest beefs with this movie, and I couldn't quite talk about it, and not spoiler times, is how every female in the story is just useless.
Yeah.
And, like, written that way. To just be like, well, women wouldn't know what to do. Women. I'm surprised we let them vote, much less... They don't know how to drive a car, or they couldn't lock a door, or these women in this movie could do nothing. He's incredible. But
You're not wrong. It's while they were progressive for having a black man be the leader,
they were regressive for how they treated women for the entire story. She even like gets in the car. Remember, she doesn't have the keys. She's smart enough to like release the brake and just like neutral down the hill, but then she just runs into a tree immediately. Like, women can't drive. she just like loses her shoes immediately somehow, and then it's just unresponsive for the rest of the movie because women are all hysterical, you know. And so like I could just see the writers' room just full of smoke and people in the '60s being like, "Well, women, I mean."
Yeah. The women in this film are not treated the greatest there because, like I said, Barbara had an interesting character arc there because, like, she, you know, had enough like retort against her brother Johnny there at the beginning and kind of seemed the voice of reason and everything. Then once you get to the house, she just still shell-shocked and she doesn't even talk. She literally doesn't talk. Ben's trying to talk and be like, "Hey, can you find these big nails?" And she's just staying there, which I get. Some people are not going to handle the zombie apocalypse like normally, like, okay, I guess I got to survive. It's either, you know, fight or flight, basically. But at the same point, she's just continually shell-shocked, and that's the bad thing, is that that's her only role for the entirety of the film.
Right. She never recovers to any degree, really, and I thought they were going to do something. The reason I thought they were going to make her into a zombie, right, is because she was, like, disassociating. She was, like, obviously for a long time, I was like, maybe she got bit by the dude or something, or, like, got scratched, or maybe it was enough that she caught the disease and it's slowly taking effect or something, because I didn't know at the time that it was just like, if you die then you get radiated back to life. I guess that's how we're going to explain that. But there's a part specifically where I was like, oh, they're going with this, whenever Helen lights a cigarette, and that's the one thing that snaps Barbara to lucidity, is the flame from the match, and then she goes back to dissociating whenever she blows out the match or whatever, remember? Because she's like talking to her and like blah blah, and she's like, well, her brother died, you know, and they're all, and then she doesn't seem to care. But then when she lights the match, Barbara goes, and like looks and is staring at the match or whatever, and I was like, oh, is she afraid of fire? Like, and there's a few scenes where she's like kind of nervous about the fire, and I was like, oh, she gonna be a zombie, you know what I mean? But
that's so funny. I never picked up on that, but that makes total sense.
Because I was like, somebody has to become a zombie from inside the house. At first, I thought that corpse upstairs was going to reanimate, like the one with the blood. Because I thought that would be the twist, because they didn't know that they were reanimated dead yet, because none of the people looked too dead. I thought that would be the cool twist if somebody in cheesy, makeup crawls up from under the stairs. And they, because Barbara also got a bunch of blood on her hand from the corpse upstairs, so I thought like maybe that was enough to influence her with the zombie virus or whatever. But no, they just didn't do anything with that, and that's why I was like, did they accidentally hint at that? Because like she was definitely afraid of the match. It was weird.
Yes.
But then, she ended up just dying whenever the other twist that I probably could have seen coming happened, where she sees her brother as a zombie and is like, what was his name? Johnny. And she's like, Johnny, no! She's like grabbing on him when she's trying to keep the zombies from coming in. Which that was cool. That was a payoff, at least.
Yeah.
I do give this film credit for setting up some stuff that paid off, but...
Yeah, I would definitely say that, but it is funny. I never once thought about her being a zombie, but you mentioning like the match, the blood, and everything, I'm like, I see exactly how you could have seen that there. It would have also been kind of interesting if like maybe during like whenever she fell down earlier or something like that, she has a scratch, and then like if she managed to live past the point of seeing like, okay, if you're bit by it, you can get turned into one, basically,
right?
Because they don't explain it, like whether the little girl died and then she came back, or if it's just the bite specifically that brought her back,
right? Well, yeah, because I feel like she did die eventually of whatever disease or whatever she got from being bit. But that's part of the reason why I also thought Barbara was going to end up a zombie, because I was like, that kid's definitely ended up a zombie, and the kid's symptoms were that she was just like hot and that she was not talking to them. But those were also Barbara symptoms. Remember, she was like, it's so hot in here, and she takes off the coat and everything.
Gosh,
so I was like, she's going to be a zombie. Like, I thought that's what they were hinting at. Maybe they were, and then they just kind of cucked us, like, well, she dies anyway.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter at all, but...
Yeah. No, that is very interesting. I'd be very curious to see, like, if Barbara was actually turning into a zombie slowly throughout the film. Because, that does make sense. Because, she did complain about it being so hot.
Yeah.
Like, that was, like, one of her biggest complaints there. So, yeah, it makes me curious if they were just like, okay, we ran out of budget.
Or like maybe that was like they were gonna do that, but then they left it on the cutting room floor or something. Whenever they were like, well, because she needs to see Johnny as a zombie, and then she's gonna die. So, but it was definitely, one of those things that I was like, she gonna be zombie. I feel like they're gonna make this happen, and then they never did.
Yeah. I'd be very curious if other people know as well if they had intended on her being a zombie, because that would have been interesting as opposed to her just freaking out on the couch and then just being killed later.
It would have given justification for that.
Yeah.
It would have given a payoff, because you do kind of dip in interest with Barbara throughout the entire like middle section of the movie, because she's just literally not responding, and I was like, yes, I get that trauma will do that to people, but at the same time it was like, okay, you got to do something with this. Either she does something at the end, she snaps back to lucidity and helps them fight off the zombies, or she becomes a zombie, or I was waiting for the payoff of some kind, and it just never really happened.
Yeah, that's definitely unfortunate there. Especially the way that she ends up dying, because basically towards the end of the film, whenever they're finally making a move of like, okay, we're going to go do stuff. Obviously, I'll mention all of the crazy shenanigans that happens earlier there, but to get to that point, the Evil Dead, the Living Dead, the ghouls start breaking through, because they've amassed a huge army by this point there, and are basically pushing force.
Well, yeah, they push through after the lights come off. That was the important part, because they were scared of the lights or whatever, and the lights go off, and then they start.
Man, I'm so glad you're picking up on some stuff I even missed. Holy cow.
Well, because Ben notices that at some point. It's not just the fire, but also the lights, because he yells at her. He's like, start turning on those lights or whatever. And, of course, she doesn't respond to him, but he's like, turns on these. So that's why everything's well lit for a while, is because they don't want to really approach the house if there's fire or light or whatever. But then as soon as the power cuts out, that's when they start ripping at the boards. Yeah,
and so whenever they're starting to tear at the boards, Helen is there at the door, I guess reinforcing it there. I'm guessing she's reinforcing it, because otherwise she was just standing there like, no,
right.
No,
well, I think that's what she was initially doing, but she was just doing a really poor job of it, because she's just like, just touching the door at some parts while it rattles,
and so then like Barbara manages to like jump in, and you think like, okay, she's got this under control. No, she literally just trades places and does the exact same thing, where she puts herself in danger, and then of course the zombies all surround her and pull her in there, because she's like shocked to see Johnny there, and so she's like dragged down, and I'm like, yeah, okay. I mean, I feel like the death is fine. I just felt the way that they did it was like trying to get her to the placement there is like really silly there. But speaking of silly deaths, whenever because I know this is one of your biggest grievances, because the two lovers, Tom and Judy, whenever they're helping Ben, move the truck out to grab gasoline. Well, let me clarify. Judy wasn't supposed to come.
Right.
She just runs out afterwards because she wants to make sure that Tom's okay. And so, they get in the car, they drive off, and I do love the part where they're like, I can't get the keys to work, and Ben just shoots the lock.
Right. I do like that he's good at improvising, but he was bad at thinking, maybe I shouldn't have the large burning torch next to the gasoline pump.
Oh my gosh,
and then Tom was bad at, maybe I shouldn't pull the lever of the gasoline pump until I had
just
it in
spray
the
it out.
Oops, I sprayed the whole car,
Like, it was special effects wise cool.
Yeah.
Actually trying to fill a truck with gas, dumbest thing alive.
Yeah. I can get it. It was very dumb, but it was like realistically dumb. I could see somebody panicking, probably just grabbed the pump and didn't think
squeezing it too hard.
Probably didn't think they were holding down the handle. It's not like a gas pump he's ever used before. It's some old farmer's gas pump on his property. Like, maybe it would, maybe you didn't know that you got to make sure the handle ain't down whenever you know, whatever. Yeah. But it was it's definitely just like, wow. Duh. The part I was more frustrated at, like if I was there, the part I would have been like, you guys are stupid about, was the fact that they just made Molotov cocktails and threw them around the truck. Like, that's the part where I was like, they're gonna catch the truck on fire.
Nah, see, that was Harry's job, throwing the Molotov cocktails in. Boy, oh boy. I guess he was trying to make sure to protect the truck.
Right.
But at the same point,
I was like, it's not like it's a super accurate weapon, and he's just like throwing them right next to the truck to make sure that the zombies aren't next to it. And I was like, I get the strategy, but I feel like if your aim's a little bit off from that weird catty-cornered second-story window,
yes,
you're just gonna hit the truck and be like, oopsies, you know?
Yeah, which even then, later on at the gas pump, the truck catches on fire, so then Tom's trying to drive away.
Yeah, he wants to get away from the gas pump because he says he's like, gotta get this away from the gas pump so that it doesn't, like, because he thought maybe the gas pump would explode or something. I don't know, but yeah, no, they just explode.
Yeah, and then they're driving away with the truck on fire, and then as he's trying to leave, he's like, oh, come on, Judy. And then Judy's like...
she's like stuck somehow. They don't really do a good job of explaining. She's like, I can't get out. And then just...
yeah, they just blow up, and it's like, Judy, okay, gotcha.
Judy, if you hadn't come along, then Tom would still be alive, and so would you.
That is true.
I do like they do kind of stuff like that on purpose, where everybody's like main goal is either realized in a way they didn't want, or like ultimately fails. You know what I mean? Let's see. Judy just wanted to protect Tom because she wanted to protect Tom so much they both died, right? Mm-hmm. But then also like what's his name? Harry.
Yeah.
Cooper. Cooper wanted to like be right so bad about protecting like the being the cellar was the safest place to be, and then he ends up dying in the cellar. And then Ben wanted to be right about, you know, well, actually I'm right. We should be out here where all the windows are boarded up, and he was wrong, and the cellar was the safest place for him. That's where he ends up lasting until the very end of the movie. So it's one of those things where like everybody like kind of gets their way, or like in their attempts to get their way they fuck up, or like that's how they die, you know. But,
yeah.
And like even Ben, like he should have stayed in the cellar, because as soon as he left he gets shot.
Yes.
Yeah, right. So like he was still wrong because he thought it would be safe inside the house, and he was incorrect about that. Once again, just it wasn't the zombies this time. So like, I feel like everybody has a sort of poetic ending. Like even Barbara really wanted to see Johnny again, and she did, but like as a zombie, you know what I mean? Like that was her one thing that she held on to. So like everybody kind of gets it in a poetic way, which was interesting, cool to me. It's just like, it's not that, I don't know, it wasn't that obvious the way the movie written it, and there was so much just like stuff that didn't matter in between all that it kind of sank it down. But
yeah, it was a good idea on paper. They just executed it weirdly there.
It just wasn't polished. They could have polished this bad boy up, but that's what happens when you're a low budget film in the 60s.
Yeah. I do find it interesting that, again, we hinted at this earlier about, like, you know, people are the ones you have to worry about in a zombie apocalypse versus the zombies, because like Harry decides whenever they're going out to the truck, he's like, nope, I am locking you guys out and I'm staying in here where it's safe, because eventually Ben's able to get in, and you know he beats Harry there because he's like angry that he locked him out, and that just fuels like Harry's distaste for Ben even more, to where whenever they're being swarmed by the zombies and everything, Harry tries to grab the gun there and basically take control, and he's like, I'm going back to the basement, and then lo and behold, he gets hit by Ben, and then Ben ends up shooting him, and then he dies in the basement,
where he has been eaten by his daughter.
Yes, and it was very interesting to see everything kind of fall apart towards the end, because, you know, that's like, I think that's one of the messages you get from a lot of zombie apocalypse films, that, you know, there's really no true end. You know, it's just like the living dead continue to hunt and hunt and hunt for you until you just slip up and they take advantage of that. It was very interesting because it's funny. I misremembered the ending, but I do remember Ben being killed because somebody shot him. But for some reason in my head, I thought it was Harry that did it. So seeing Harry die early, I was like, oh, okay, I'm surprised by that. But then whenever Ben locks himself in the basement and hides there, and then he gets back out, and again he's inside of the house there, and the zombie hunters, the ghoul squad,
yes,
goes out and they're like, oh hey, I see one in there.
Right.
Awesome, got it.
Yeah.
Which supposedly that wasn't originally going to be the ending with Ben shot. Initially they were going to have like Ben be saved, because it's like, yeah, we want one of them to be saved.
Right.
But I'm trying to think. I wanted to make sure I got his name right. Dwayne Jones fought against this. He's like, no, I think they should shoot me, because I think it'd be really shocking to see the main protagonist be killed.
Right.
But B, you're not doing the black community any favors by having a black man be saved by
the police.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's like, that's just going to be an insult there.
I almost made a joke about that, but I was like, it would probably be in poor taste. And I was like, of course the police just shoot the first black person they see.
Yes. And so he wanted it to be a double whammy, because he's just like, no, like that's just going to be an insult if I'm just saved.
Makes it so much better that was somewhat intentional, to be like, yeah, of course the police would just shoot him.
Because whenever I watched it the first time, I was kind of like, so they just shoot this dude?
Right.
That's the end? Like, I remember it being a lot more jarring to me the first time I watched it, and I'm just like, well, that sucks. But especially given the context that Dwayne specifically asked for this to happen, and just kind of the message he wanted his performance to bring, I'm like, okay, you know what? I can respect that.
Yeah.
I liked Ben a ton. I didn't want to see him die, but at the same point, can't argue with the thought process.
Right. That was one of the things that surprised me, and also kind of left me. It didn't leave me feeling satisfied, but like in a good way almost, where I was like, that wasn't a happy ending with a little bow on it, but I like respect it more for that, because I was like, a lot of the tropes this movie set up for future zombie movies to do stand firm, but that's the one that doesn't really, because I feel like in most zombie movies, again, not all of them, I feel like in most zombie movies, like somebody survives or like could survive ? Yes. But I do feel like frequently the main character does die at the end. But I guess maybe I shouldn't say zombie movies, but just horror movies as a whole. Like usually there's like a group of survivors. Most of them don't survive, and like at least one of them's still alive at the end or whatever. And I was like, okay, that happened again this movie, and then they just kill him right at the end, and I was like, I didn't expect that for a movie this old that was setting up these tropes, but that was cool.
Yeah, it's really depressing as well if you think about it, because by the point, you mentioned this, but during the credits, they opt to show pictures instead of like film, because again, it's pretty depressing, because obviously they shot him. They don't know that he was a ghoul at all whatsoever. So that's like the depressing thing. They're thinking like, yeah, we're just doing our job.
Another ghoul, right?
Yeah.
This one was holding a gun for some reason.
Yes, weird. It's acting almost human. And then they use like meat hooks to drag the body to a burn pile there, and then at the end of the film, you see like them just light up the pile of wood there, and he just gets burned, and it's just kind of depressing, thinking like,
like nobody will know what they did to survive, the whole time.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that's very, I don't know if poetic's the right word, but it definitely has a strong vibe to it.
It's definitely a powerful ending in that respect. It's one that will make you think maybe a little bit more than just like, well, he got saved, the end,
Yes, exactly. It has a lot more gravity towards thinking about it there, so I definitely can give a lot of mad respect that they ultimately chose that ending, even if it's not like the most like, oh man, he survived, everything paid off,
right,
doing that. But yeah, I know that was like the big spoiler, I would argue, is him getting shot. I did again, whenever it came to like certain deaths, I know we talked about it earlier, but like going back to that little girl being a zombie and everything, I do find it funny that she had a spade and that Helen refused to move from the spot, which I
Right.
guess she's traumatized seeing her little girl about to kill her, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But like whenever she's stabbed, they have like that weird echoey scream
Mm-hmm.
there. So I don't know if they did it just to make it seem less traumatic there, or what the purpose was of distorting her scream or whatever. But that's another scene that does stick with me, both for good and bad reasons.
Right. Yeah, I feel like ultimately kind of how cheesy Helen dying there does detract from it a little bit, but I do feel like the girl actually was without the weird scream and the Helen just standing there dying, like making it funny. It would have been a really harrowing and spooky part to see this little girl just murdering someone graphically in a movie that set in a time period where you really don't see that kind of stuff very often. So
Yeah. Aside from that,
what
yeah,
about
go
other
ahead.
gore? I mean,
Uh-huh.
some of the gory stuff that surprised you. Did you expect them to show them like eating entrails and stuff?
I only knew about that because I historically that's like one of the few times where again they did show like a lot of like gore is just like them eating it. So I remembered that, but watching it again, some of the stuff they eat, like, you know, you can look at like a bone and it's like, oh yeah, that's like a turkey leg or something like that. But there's like some where it's just like looks like a liver or something they're eating.
Yeah. Somebody was definitely eating some kind of liver. Somebody was eating like a raw piece of chicken or something. Like, I was like, wow, these are there was definitely something that was made to look like entrails. It might have been, you know, pig intestines or something.
Yeah, I feel like the film was trying to be shocking in a lot of ways there whenever it came to the gore and having that one naked woman walking.
Yeah, that was another trope that I thought. I was like, wow, I did not expect to see just like a naked woman, but they managed to put in a naked woman in this old ass horror movie.
Yeah, supposedly the idea came from the fact that like if she walked away from a morgue.
Oh, yeah,
I guess
that makes sense.
Yeah, that was the idea supposedly behind her, and it was actually like one of those like models that artists, you know, use whenever they're looking for like a subject
Oh, yeah.
to draw. But apparently a lot of locals heard there was going to be a naked woman on set, so they were sitting outside the filming location.
I believe it.
Yes, because, you know,
rural Pennsylvania or whatever.
Yeah, so it was definitely interesting to see them try to come up with something shocking, because of course we mentioned it earlier, this film is fairly tame to what has been put to film in recent years there, but for 1968 I'm sure this was like very shocking, just like again the blood, the gore, the death, and the backside of a naked woman there.
Right.
You know.
Well, yeah, you see her titties too in one part. You do see some straight up nips. So I was like, wow, they really did it.
Yes, and it was impressive also seeing people be caught on fire.
Yeah, that one did surprise me because like a lot of the action up to that point was like, you know, obviously the guy's not getting beat to death, but it was like, I'm beating you to death with a tire iron slightly off screen, and then whenever we show it, I'm definitely not putting my full power into these punches and stuff, and it was like, okay, this is a little cheesy, but then, yeah, seeing people actually get caught on fire, I was like, interesting.
Yeah, supposedly some people were caught on fire purposely and accidentally.
It definitely seemed more realistic. Some of them were like, "Oh, I'm on fire," and then there was definitely one guy that was like running and like, like trying to put it out.
Yeah, I was also surprised to see like anytime like if they got shot in the head or stabbed in the head, they would show like the wound and everything, as opposed to like a lot of times for earlier films they would like just imply the violence as opposed to actually show it. So yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a fairly gory film for a film in the late 60s.
Yeah, I was impressed by how they showed that the zombies wouldn't die just by anything too, because originally they were just kind of like beating them on the head and they would just die, and I was like, wow, okay. But then there's a part where the zombies are like reaching into the house early on and trying to grab like Ben's gun, and he like shoots one and it like staggers back, And then it just like walks up back to the window again, and he shoots it again, and it staggers back, and then he just walks back up to the window, and it's not until he shoots him a third time in the head that he dies. And I was like, okay, it was cool. I'm glad they actually like showed that.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, and they do have that bit again. The news is just exposition where they says like, yes, locals have confirmed, but that's towards the end of the film where it's already like, okay, a little too late. Where they're like, yep, you have to destroy the brain because the brain's controlling the body. It's being affected by the radiation.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to destroy the brain.
I did find the way the zombies were here very interesting too, because I guess I'm just used to like modern movies, which is like, it's a virus, or it's a fungus, or you know, whatever the thing of choice is, but which just kind of like makes sense intuitively for modern audiences. But this one was like, we sent a probe to Jupiter and sent it back and then blew it up because it had a large amount of strange radiation, and somehow that's making dead people come back to life now. Yeah. It was like very War of the Worldsy or something, I don't know, where they just pulled some inspiration from like, explanation. Here
yes,
you go.
Which is pretty interesting that they decided to take the time and actually try to explain, as opposed to being like, it's ghouls.
We don't know why, you know, which would have been perfectly acceptable, but considering it's only been going on for like a day or two in their universe, but
yeah. Aside from all that fun ghoulish stuff there, was there anything else you wanted to touch upon for Night of the Living Dead or anything like that?
I don't think so. I guess the only other thing I would add is it's always interesting to consider in universe, you know, what's going to happen after the movie ends in a zombie apocalypse movie. Like, is the whole world getting taken over by zombies, or do they have a handle on this? Is there some amount of hope? You know, what's going on? And this one was interesting to me because it seemed like they were pretty much taking care of it.
Yeah.
Like, it seemed like it was literally one night of the Living Dead, and then they were like, okay, we get what's going on, and we can just shoot them in the head, and we're going to bury and burn all of our dead immediately, and that's going to be it until this wears off, you know? So I did think it was a strangely, like, contained zombie virus, which is almost more believable, I guess, that they were like, okay, well, we figured this out pretty quickly. Humans outnumber them by a lot, and we're also not stupid, so we just gonna shoot them in the head and burn them. But I don't know. How do you feel about what would happen afterwards?
Well, you know, it's interesting because George Romero would go on to create sequels of like Dawn of the Dead, the original one, then Day of the Dead. So I don't know if they're canonically sequels there, but at this, because it's basically obviously a different group of survivors and everything.
Well, is it the same? Is it the same zombies? Is it the same ghouls? Are they also radiation or what?
It's been too long for me to say for certain there, because the one I remember the most is Dawn of the Dead. I would say they don't really mention it. It's just kind of like boom zombies.
Boom zombies.
There. So I'd be curious on rewatching them at some point just to see exactly if it truly is a continuation or if it's just a sequel just in name only, if that makes sense there. But whenever it comes to looking for this film, I do feel like they have it fairly, like, as silly as it is, they seem to have the situation contained. Like, yeah, just shoot in the head. Like, they had like a whole fleet and everything move across the town and everything, to where it just kind of feels like open-ended, like, you know, okay, we're resolving the problem there, as opposed to like they're still out there, because they clear out the zombies fairly easily. They're just
I did enjoy seeing that, like, during the daytime, the whole line of militiamen just like just like, there's one, keep walking, you know, because they are just like, when there's stragglers and there's just a couple of them and you have a whole army, it seems pretty easy to take care of them. But
yeah, it's definitely one of the endings that does try to make it feel conclusive. Like, yep, they start taking care of the zombie apocalypse, and unfortunately our boy Ben gets hit in the head.
Right, it's almost like, at least in this county or whatever, like, this is the last zombie victim, because he's just like, they say the chief is like, well, pretty much everything's clear, I just want to check out this one house or whatever that's way back in the woods that's behind that tree line or whatever, and then they're like, oh well, there's a zombie, boom, and he's like, it's almost like he's the last victim but he's shot by the police instead of killed by the zombies.
Yeah.
He almost made it. He almost made it past the Night of the Living Dead.
Almost. He did one hell of a job. Unfortunately,
Made the mistake of not saying something.
Yes, exactly.
Not saying hello, you know, so they knew he wasn't a zombie.
Yes, very, very unfortunate. Rip in peace, Ben.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that about covers this for this episode here. So how's about we talk about the next film, the next teaser, shall we?
Yeah.
Okay, so for this film, we're going to be jumping 8 years ahead to the magical year 1976. Wow. Where an adaptation of one of Stephen King's novels is adapted into a film about a girl who has superpowers, and she's going to high school.
Interesting.
And let's see, and I want to say this was Stephen King's first book.
I don't know. I haven't read a lot of Stephen King. Is it Pet Sematary? Is that what it was? What is
that? Is one of the books that got adapted, but not for this one here. Let me see. Yes, it is his first one he ever wrote there, and it rhymes with scary.
Mary.
Close. It's another female name.
Jerry. Carrie. It's
yes.
Carrie. Okay.
Yes, it is Carrie.
Okay. Oh, okay. I know Carrie. I didn't know that was the plot of Carrie. Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's super exciting there, because I definitely think it's going to be an interesting film to watch for our next episode, especially since school's starting up for a lot of folks around here.
Wow.
Yep. Wow.
School. I forgot about school. Too old for that. Just kidding. I work at a school. I should have known.
So yeah, thank you all so much for listening to this episode, and we'll see y'all again next time when we're Poppin the Scary with Carrie.
Carrie is scary. Poppin the Scary.
Please don't say that. That's very wrong. She's not even 18. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube, Castbox, or iTunes platforms to stay up to date when new episodes drop. To see what Aaron and I are up to, check out our respective Twitter accounts. For me, it is @ColeKirkVA, and for Aaron, it is @AnimalGameDev. Thank you all so much for listening to our podcast. We'll speak to you all again next time when we're Poppin the Scary.